Hello and welcome to our special show in the run-up to the Union Budget 2019. I am Vishal Dahiya and today we will talk about corporate tax. Now, corporate tax is an important component of the government's revenue. The government gets more than 55% of its direct tax revenue from the corporate sector. And corporate tax in India is among the highest in the world. If we add up corporate tax, surcharges and other cess, a company with a turnover of more than 250 crore rupees will end up paying around 48.3% of its profit in taxes. Such a situation may not be conducive for the growth of the company and may even hamper prospects of new investment. There has been a constant demand from the corporate sector to lower this burden. The government has made certain changes in the corporate tax structure, but to make Indian industry more attractive for investments, more needs to be done. In today's show, among other things, we'll also discuss how much scope does Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has to give relief on corporate tax in her first union budget next week. But first, let me introduce the guests to you who we have with us in the studio for a discussion on this. Let me begin with Mr. Krishan Malhotra, and corporate tax expert with us. We also have Mr. Rachit Chawla, CEO of Finway Capital, somebody who tells people as to where to invest, why to invest and how to invest. We also have with us Mr. Santosh Tiwari, a senior director from FICCI. We'll come to you and we'll start the discussion. But before we do that, let's give our viewers a little bit of perspective on where exactly we stand on corporate tax. What are the numbers? And let's look at the numbers as far as corporate taxes are concerned. If you look at these numbers, then India has two slabs for corporate taxes. And if you look at these slabs, then the companies have been divided in two parts. Those who have a turnover of less than 250 crore rupees attract 25% of corporate tax, and companies with a turnover of more than 250 crore rupees have to pay 30% tax on corporate tax. Now, there is a 7% surcharge on income tax paid on corporate earnings when total income exceeds 1 crore rupees, but not exceeding 10 crore rupees, and at the rate of 12% of such tax where total income exceeds 10 crore rupees. Now, corporate tax collection has seen a steady growth over the years. 2015 and 16 year, it stood at over 4.53 lakh crore rupees, while in 2016-17, it was at 4.84 lakh crore rupees. In 2017-18, the overall corporate tax collection was 5.7 lakh crore rupees, and in 2018-19 it jumped to 6.62 lakh crore rupees. In the interim budget for 2019, the government is expecting to collect 7.6 lakh crore rupees from the corporate tax. So let's begin the discussion and let's try and find out as to what the current situation is and what more needs to be done and how much is the scope for those improvements. Mr. Malhotra, let me first begin with giving our viewers a perspective. We gave the numbers, but if you look at the perspective, what are we talking about when we say that the corporate taxes are pretty high here, and what are the different slabs and why so, and how things have moved around in the last few years?
So I think based on your figures, as you very rightly put in, right now we'll end up paying, including dividend distribution tax, somewhere around 48%, which is extensively high. And if you look at US market, even the Trump reduced the tax from 30% to 21%. So certainly there is a pressure, although the rates were slashed up to the turnover of the company, like the companies who have a turnover of 250 crores up to 25%. So overall demand, in order to spur the growth, I think it is important that we will have to make it more competitive. So therefore, there is a demand even from FICCI and from different chambers that industry really wants just to regularize and bring completely the rate to 25%. But now, if you look at it, what we have been hearing and being, it's an interim budget in a way. One budget was there, now the we are already in in the month of July. Will they really do any slashing at this point of time? Because at one point they have said, as far as fiscal is concerned from the government perspective, I think they have already expressed that don't ask any relief from us, at least in this year. Let's focus on how we can see few things right, but not in terms, because there is no deficit, there is no fiscal, finances are there just to give any relief. And since 2 months are already over, this is the second budget. Whether they will bring any changes or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Only thing is that industry, in case even if they retain, they should not introduce any surcharge, any further surcharge to really augment based on some schemes, infrastructure schemes, etc. So I think the basic thing is that at this point of time, will they really think of slashing? Although there is a very heavy demand even from the dividend distribution tax, which is as high as 20% with surcharge. So there is a demand that why not to reduce by or just bring it down to 10%. So the demands are there, but based on their fiscal deficit and the way we are, whether we will really be able to bring something in this direction is something I think which one will really have to see.
Okay, Mr. Santosh, as Mr. Malhotra is talking about the demands from the corporate sector, as a representative of one of the industry bodies, FICCI here, on what basis are these demands being made? Because we've heard these demands since a long time now. The corporates have been asking for a cut in the tax, either in the dividend tax or in some other form.
See, when do you do that? That is a question which the government has to answer. But if you ask us, why corporate tax should be cut?
Yeah.
Investments have dried up. Now today, when you have to boost your GDP growth, which is also looking very sluggish right now, you have to perk up, you have to boost investment. How do you boost investments? Cost of doing business in India is the highest, almost the highest across the globe. It would be amongst the highest, no doubt about it. And cost of doing business has two parts. One is your interest rate. You have the highest real interest rate today in the country. That you need to slash by another 100 basis points.
Okay.
Then you come to corporate tax, which is another part of reducing cost of doing business. Already, Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley, former Finance Minister, he had said that corporate tax would be reduced for all the companies from 30 to 25%, but in a phased manner. So for smaller companies, you have already reduced corporate tax from 30 to 25%. Now the question is, how do you reduce this for the bigger companies? Those are the companies who will make big investments. Today you need investments. So one opportunity or the one idea could be that you link somehow the investments to job creation, which is another big concern. So if you introduce some model, which FICCI President Mr. Sandeep Somani has suggested that, if you link new investments to job creation, so whichever company is creating jobs, you give some reduction in corporate tax and there is a complete formula. Okay. If you go on those lines, or find out some model, to reduce corporate tax from 30% to 25%, maybe even in a phased manner, then investments which are the immediate necessity to perk up your GDP growth will come into picture in the economy, which is, if you don't perk up investment today, especially private sector investment, the situation was looking quite okay or even brighter, 6 months back. But again, you have come to a situation where you need investment pickup in a big way in coming 2 or 3 quarters. Okay. For that, you need to give some indication to the corporate sector that your cost of doing business will go down and government will take these measures. So budget is very important in that regard to give indications to the corporate sector that government is inclined to reducing cost of doing business for the corporates, and corporate tax rate is very important pillar in that.
Okay, so what you're saying is basically, by incentivizing the investments for the corporate sector in terms of the tech structure. Let's bring in Rachit here. Rachit, is that the option, one of the options available, but is that you see, if you look at it from the government's perspective, is there something which is feasible here?
So absolutely, I don't think so. Government has is left with a lot of option, but to reduce the corporate tax. That is mainly because the economy seems to slow down. We were at 8% 1 year back, and now we are sitting at somewhere around 6% if we agree to the figures which were given. That means economy is slowing down, and in order to jumpstart the economy again, we need to reduce the corporate tax. As you rightly pointed out, it's almost sitting, as India, we are sitting at double corporate tax. And if we look at our GDP numbers, we always take pride in comparing ourselves to China, but we need to understand that China is an economy which is 4 times bigger than India. So if we are comparing ourselves to China, China is still steadily growing at 6% plus. So we should be looking at a double digit growth, as it was pointed out a few years back when BJP came into power. And as far as this budget is concerned, I feel the government should be very aggressive, being the first year back in the power with majority, and they should definitely make tax structure very simple, whether a GST 2.0 or the corporate tax. There should be some drastic measures for investments to actually increase in India.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Malhotra, as far as these measures are concerned, which all three of you are talking about, the government has set up a task force, to look at the overall income tax structure, which is going to the committee to submit its report, at the end of July, and there is some talk about how direct tax code might be implemented, but those are still in the domain of that committee, and we'll have to wait for the report. But if you look at the investment scenario, in the recent past, there have been steps which have been taken in terms of giving some relief to the startups in terms of angel tax and all that. So, investment scenario, you believe that the government has done a little bit of push in the last few years to ensure that the ease of doing business also gets improved and the investment scenario also improves. Is that happening?
I think these steps, there was an intention. The intention of the government was very clear, and as you rightly said, the steps were taken up, especially for startup. But unfortunately, in terms of implementing the same, there were always being doubts. And as a result, the government was really prompt to hear it out and come out with clarifications. But on the ground, we did not see the impact the way it should have been. So I think still certain more reforms are required to be done. And as very rightly put in, that maybe broadly they will have to think through that how we can expand the investment, because in industry, although the revenues have gone in terms of the collection of taxes, but we have not seen any major big investment which has already been taken place. So therefore there should be some incentive which is required to be given. Okay. Number two, which you very rightly said, now the new DTA is in pipeline and got an extension. So the government initially initiated, and again we saw that the same government is there now in power. So there is a very clear intention to come out with a simplified tax, which is almost on anvil. So one of the views would be, let it be thrown to the public in month of August and then take their reviews, and they can always introduce by end of this year. So therefore they may not do any drastic changes, and now it again depends upon the act is being formulated in a way to make it more simple. And one is, nobody minds paying the taxes, but the kind of litigation which we have, the kind of uncertainties, those are the things which derail the whole process and your whole plannings in terms of your returns. So I think the way the intentions are, the government will come with a very clear, simple income tax. Maybe one will have to see through that, and one of the options would be that instead of jumping now only for a few months or for the rest of the year, why not to start with the new act as early as possible, because which is right on anvil, they will introduce it shortly for the public review. Okay. So I think one will really have to see, and it's going to be then see how the government will present in this budget.
Okay, and then this government has shown its willingness to go ahead and take those hard reforms route as far as economy is concerned, because if you look at the GST as well, the way it was implemented and the way it has moved forward. But one more question before I go back to Mr. Tiwari, and that's Mr. Tiwari's suggestion as well. One he made in his first answer is incentivizing investments. Is that also one aspect which can be looked into?
That's very interesting question, because initially the intention of the government was to reduce or to eliminate all the incentives, because we have not seen any new incentives which were introduced. So there was incentives which was given to IT industry. Certain sections already have a sunset clause, and they would be completing their deadlines in a year or two. Because incentives also lead to a lot of litigation. And in case if they will again bring out and create a disparity with someone who's making investment in a particular industry, other than infrastructure, I'm not sure, because the intention initially was that we don't want it to incentivize. We will make the thing so simple and clear, so that let the investment come, and there is a huge demand in the country. Okay. One can really have a good quantum of turnovers and can have a good, the margins. But would they really again bring back the incentivizing exports, or one will really have to look at it. But okay. I have my doubts, because if they will really change that. But certain incentives in a way, like in the case of startups or MSMEs, those who are having a very bad impact, they may come out with some special incentive for one set of small companies so that they can promote. One cannot rule out.
Okay. Mr. Tiwari, as Mr. Malhotra is also pointing out, and Rachit also said that, the focus from the government's point of view, effectively, if you look at it right now, should be ensuring that the ease of doing business, that is something which needs to be improved more further. And there is always a room for improvement in that, case.
Yes. See, apart from the fiscal and also the monetary measures, fiscal measures would be some policies, you know, which are there in the offing, like new industrial policy. Those need to be expedited. There are other policies, you know, retail policy. These policies need to be expedited. So these are fiscal measures. Then you have monetary measures, which I have already outlined, that you need to cut repo rate by another 100 basis points. But the bigger issue here is to perk up investment is that of next wave of reforms. You have already brought in reforms like GST, RERA, IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, is a huge reform, big reform in Indian reform history. You know.
And their impact has also been seen on the ground.
Yeah. So the actual impact on the ground you would see in next 1, 2 or 3 years. So when these the impact of these reforms are there, if you substantiate these reforms by next wave of reforms in the critical areas like land, labor, or even ease of doing business, you know, there are several reforms which at the state level you can do. Like in industrial policy, you are thinking of bringing in a body which would more or less act like a GST council, where states and center would come together and decide on reforms which would be helping industry to gain foothold in states. So apart from fiscal and monetary measures, you need to go or usher in, you know, next wave of reforms which have been pending for quite some time, so that in next 1, 2 or probably 3 years, you know, you have an ecosystem where reforms are supporting incentives, and then you have fiscal and monetary policies also are there in place on the table, and again your investments are coming back on track. So in next 2, 3 years, you know, government will have to chip in with reforms, RBI will have to chip in with support, policies which support investment, and in terms of government also, the whole perspective will have to change from, you know, bringing in curbs or anything else to freeing up the whole thing. Next set of policies, you know, which free up policy domains where, you know, investments are much easier to bring in than get curbed.
And the bottlenecks are done away with. Rachit, do you agree with that perspective? Reforms is the key.
I do agree, but the government has already announced pretty big reforms in the past. What I feel is the need of the hour is execution. At macro level, I think the government is thinking correctly. You know, I agree with GST being launched, but at execution level, do you really see the pain point? All the exporters are yet to sort of get their refunds back, and there's a huge liquidity crunch in the economy. So what we need to do is, we need to execute all the reforms which we have brought in the economy. We need to mitigate all the problems that are going in. Incentivizing, as you said, will be the key to get investments which are drying up. And apart from that, I think the intent behind startups is also correct. Because startups is where the jobs are going to get created. And India as an economy doesn't need 10 unicorns. It needs $1,000 million enterprises, which will add a lot of boom to Indian consumption as well. So I feel India as an economy, they should look at speeding it up and increasing the GDP number as well.
Okay, Mr. Malhotra, reforms and a mix of reforms and a good execution on the ground of the policies which have already been framed or are likely to be framed further?
Yeah, I think there is still a scope. As we talked about, land reforms are something which is very, very important for industry. I think the government really have to see how they will take state into the confidence, and whatever reforms are labor reforms, those are some of the pain points, especially for the manufacturing industries. That is very important. Secondly, on the GST front, if you see, as very rightly put in, people, there are some gaps, but I think the government is committed. But one thing which is very clear is that they are going to introduce very stiff, the penalties when the people, when you are not transferring the rate cut to the customer. In the last GST meeting, they said we will come very heavily on that. Collections have improved in April and May. We see it is more than 1 lakh crore of rupees. So they would like to improve upon that. And in terms of having so many rates, as there is a commitment, one rate, I don't know it will come so easily, but at least 2 rates, one for the items which are at a different level, which are used by HNS, but the one which are required by the ordinary set of people. There's a huge demand from different sectors to reduce the rate, especially for real estate, automotive. These are the industries where I think people are looking to streamline the rates on GST, which is not really an issue of the budget, but I think government is committed in over a period of time through GST Council. Those changes would really bring in so as to reduce the liquidity problem which we see, or just to be more competitive to avoid any inflation as we see in case if the prices really shoot up because of the high GST rates.
Okay, Mr. Tiwari, a last question to you is we have had this demand scenario wherein the corporates obviously want the tax structure to be a bit more moderated, and then there are demands to go ahead and ensure that ease of doing business is also further improved as well. But if you look at from the finance minister's perspective as well, the first budget of the new government after the interim budget has been put in place, how much of an elbow room do you believe, a maneuvering room, the new finance minister has in the first budget to accommodate all these requests from the corporate sector?
See, if you look at it from finance minister's perspective, obviously, if you or I am the finance minister, you would first look at your fiscal deficit. But when you get into a situation like this, which is today, you need to go beyond fiscal deficit. There is no harm in looking at first the growth scenario, which the Prime Minister has also said, and also the investment scenario first, and then look at fiscal deficit. Nobody is saying don't look at fiscal deficit. But today, if you do not bring in policies which boost investment, then the whole cycle has got broken.
Okay.
You have to maintain that cycle, and for that you need to look at investments, Vijay.
Okay, need to look at investments. Rachit, is that what again the key here is?
Absolutely, that's the key. And I think another aspect which the government needs to look at is simplicity, ease of doing business. And they really need to change the entire system. Like above 250 CR is 30% corporate tax, below it's 25. Why not just do it at level playing field and just simplify it for everybody so that even a layman understands. And that will only increase investments to India and incentivize the corporate sector.
Okay, simplification, investments, these are the key reforms as well, and then implementation of the existing policies. How would you sum it up, Mr. Malhotra?
So I think what we will achieve in this budget, I don't know, but I'm sure that there would be a very clear direction. At least this budget will give a clear direction and intention of the government. Whether they'll be able to give everything what the industry wants or a few things or fiscal deficit, I know it's something which is very, very important being in the first year, but I'm sure they will come out with some direction, some reforms so that the industry would really get a boost to say that this is what government intends to do. You may not see only in this year itself, but they will lay down the path, how they are going to achieve and what they wanted to achieve in next 3 to 4 years.
Okay, so clearly there it is. As our panelists have pointed out, there are several demands from the corporate sector as far as the new budget is concerned, and the new finance minister seems that her task is all cut out. So let's wait and watch exactly what Nirmala Sitharaman has in on the cards for the corporate sector and investments as well in the budget 2019. We'll keep on bringing you all the updates on this aspect, and we'll see you again on Monday. Keep watching Ajisba Television.